All right, I see it. Thank you.
Hey folks, can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Is that too loud by any chance? I'm trying to adjust my mic. Okay. I'm not going to yell then that because that would probably hurt your ears. Give me a second. I'm trying to get my video started and then we'll get going. Just one second. All right. I think that is going to work. Um, I don't know if anybody has a Mac. Does anybody have a Mac? No. So Macs have a feature where it will automatically pick up your cell phone if you've got an iPhone and like your iPad and everything. And so like if you're not careful, like it'll turn on like the wrong camera and like just better hope your camera is pointing in the right direction if it happens. So I've learned that the hard way. Hopefully I can pass that wisdom on to you guys so that you don't have to learn that the hard way. Um, well, how is everybody tonight? Awesome. Awesome. Like the thumbs up. Um, well, I would like to do a couple things tonight. Excuse me. I've got a um, complete neuropsychological evaluation test results that I would like to walk through with you all. Everything's been de-identified, but it's it's a good way to understand test scores, understand how we rule in or out, like learning disabilities, ADHD, things like that. Um, Particularly as it relates to what the rest of this class is going to be about, with the cognitive IQ testing, academic achievement testing, personality testing, emotional and behavioral functioning testing and assessment, the neuropsych testing as well. And then just being able to kind of begin the process of understanding the ability to integrate all that data and to see kind of how complex it is, but also how you could probably over time build the skill and identifying the different patterns that you'll see in test results. So and then tonight's case is a 17-year-old, and my goal is to be able to do this every week from here on out is bring in a new case so that you get familiar with the different types of tests, and not all just 17-year-olds. It'll be adults and even little kids, but and not that I'm trying to teach you how to be a neuropsychologist. It's really the exposure to psychological reports and those results that you will come across. And in my opinion, it's the best way to translate what you're reading in your textbook into real world kind of practice. Sound good? And then I'd also like to just open up, because usually week 5 is whenever I am giving you all the opportunity to ask questions about private practice issues, and if you're planning on going to private practice, kind of just the ins and outs of that, any and all questions related to that, and then also any questions related to like pre-prac or practicum, licensure, what's the meaning of life, those kinds of things. So, and I'm an existentialist, so I feel qualified to help you with the meaning of life, although I will tell you there is no answer. So before we jump into that, just know that's where I'm probably going to land. I'm just kidding. That's not actually where I land. That's just what they say. Before we get going, any questions, concerns? All right. All right. Well, I did get last week, or last week's class posted finally, or the last 2 posted finally. This past week was a rough week, to put it lightly. Our HVAC went out, or our AC went out, and I've got a 6 and a 9-year-old, and so that's not any fun. Plus, we were all sick, which I'm pretty sure with COVID. Honestly, we didn't get tested, but man, if it wasn't COVID, that was a rough whatever. Yeah. And then on top of that, Blue Cross Blue Shield decided to remove me from their panel without informing me, because there's a million bajillion things that you have to kind of update. One of which is like your online profile that all insurance companies can go look at, make sure that your license is up to date and all that kind of stuff. And I had forgotten to do mine for the first time in like 10 years. And usually I get like an update and a reminder to do it, because it's like every 45 days you have to re-up. It's pretty crazy. And yeah, just had about $6,000 or $7,000 of claims rejected. So,
not giving you a heads up, that's pretty typical of BCBS. I've seen that before.
yeah, I've been in contract with them for almost 10 years now, and yeah, it just seems to be getting worse on that front. But yeah, so we're navigating that. We have called about 4,000 different numbers and have yet to speak to anybody. It's just been computers on the, dial 0 if you are angry. Dial 0 if you're not, whatever. But so anyway, with all that said, what I'd like to start with is going through these test results and just kind of doing a rehash of just how to interpret test scores and things like that, and really kind of zooming in on a couple of things. Not to get lost in all the data, because it's going to be a lot. So don't feel like don't worry about feeling overwhelmed, because that's pretty normal. But really zooming in on IQ, zooming in on academics, and then from there, just kind of just soaking in as much as you can from there. So if you have questions, do let me know. Okay. And I will be happy to see if I can answer them. So let me share my screen here. All right. Can y'all see that okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good, because I'm trying to. Here. That's a lot, right? It's a lot of test scores. What are we looking at here? We're looking at basically in a neuropsychological evaluation. And reason why I'm doing this is because this is as complicated as it gets. Typically, you're not going to be looking at this many scores, okay? Whenever you see reports. But really and truly, like I said, I want you to remember what we're looking at is normative compared data. So like if I gave a memory test or like a reading test, let's say to anybody, and let's say you scored like a 7 out of 10. Well, again, we don't know if that's good or not unless we know what the average is. And once we find that average, we find that average by comparing that raw score to thousands of people the same age and same grade level. If it's a kid, especially the same grade level, to see where their their performance is in relation to their peers, kind of like the SAT test or the GRE and things like that. So I want you to pay attention to the percentiles, right? And just to rehash this out, but what's the average? What would be exactly average percentile score? So if somebody scored at the 50th percentile, right, on our normal bell curve, everybody's like, listen, it's fall break, right? Or if you have kids, it is. It's not really a break for parents. Let me pull this up then. This will help us. Let's see. All right. Can y'all see that? Bell curve? Awesome. It's every grad student's worst nightmare is a bell curve. Although I don't know anybody that grades on a bell curve anymore. It's really kind of outdated. Let's do this. So the average score on any of these tests that we're about to look at is going to be the 50th percentile. Everybody understand that? Okay. The normal range. Actually, let me go back to this and I'm going to type on the other one. And I apologize if you hear my dog, Leroy Jenkins, barking. That's what he does best. So
Great name.
it is a great name, huh? I mean, it's I'm telling you, he's the most Leroy Jenkins dog you've ever met. So the normal range of scores is the 16th through 84th percentile, because that equals 60, what is that? 68% people score healthy brains score here. Does everybody understand that?
Yes.
Okay. Everybody's like, come on, man, enough math. Get it. So first and foremost, let's talk about this person's IQ. This is a 12th grader, age 17. I believe it's a female. Could be wrong. I can't remember exactly, but what about their IQ? So if we're looking at their IQ here, it says FSIQ. Does anybody know what that means?
Full scale? I don't know.
That's it. Full scale IQ, which is another way of saying the global intellectual functioning or global IQ score, right? So here I gave the WASI-2, which is called the Wechsler Abbreviated Scale of Intelligence. And it's the second edition, that's why it has the 2 there. And what it does is I can give just 2 subtests that will, when combined, give me an estimated IQ score of an individual. Typically, what you will see, you won't see this test given very often unless it's from a neuropsychologist, because we tend to not really like IQ testing. But typically you'll see like the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, the WISC, or the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, the WAIS. And it's going to include like at least 10 different subtests, like the vocabulary subtest, matrix reasoning, block design, several others. And then you put all those scores together and it gives you the full scale IQ. I give an abbreviated version because I don't really care about all that stuff as much as I care about estimating this person's IQ. I just need a roundabout average score of what's a good prediction of what their actual IQ is, because I need to know if we're talking about like ruling out learning disability. As you can see, we tested the academic skills here. I need to know what's a good estimate of this person's score on the rest of these tests. Because as we know, IQ is kind of a good estimate for the most part of what somebody's attention span should be, or what their memory should be, what their reading skills should be. In other words, if you had a really low IQ, let's say at the 2nd percentile, well, I wouldn't expect their reading to be at, at the 75th percentile. I would expect their reading to be pretty close to where their IQ is. Everybody understand that?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So with that said, this person is in 12th grade, age 17. And what can we see just in general about their IQ, their estimated IQ?
It's in a relatively high percentile.
Mm-hmm.
It's higher than the median.
Absolutely. And so what's another way of saying, if you had 100 folks that you were comparing them to, where would they score?
He gets a C.
The top 25.
Uh-huh.
She's better than the 75 of them.
Yep. So scores at the 75th percentile, which is pretty good, right? So this is pretty intelligent. Do y'all agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. Here's the thing to know about IQ is that the higher the IQ goes, anything above, let's say the 50th percentile, which is exactly average. So the 50th percentile all the way through, the 99th percentile, there's not a big qualitative difference between what the 50th percentile can do, like vocationally or even educationally, versus somebody at the 99th percentile. The main difference there is how efficient the 99th percentile person would be at problem solving as compared to the other person. It's not that they couldn't do it, it's the efficiency, and it's the it's basically how quick conceptualization can occur. So in other words, everybody wants their IQ to be off the charts, but the truth is IQ is only minimally predictive of like future success in like education or even career wise, as it relates to or as compared to like effort and just perseverance and sheer luck, honestly. So with that said, this person has 75th percentile. So we would expect, right, their reading skills, their spelling skills, and their math skills, not necessarily to be at the 75th percentile, but probably pretty close, and especially within the average range. Would everybody agree with that? Right.
Yeah,
So what do we see here, though?
possibly learning disabilities or
Mm-hmm. So we've got someone with a really high IQ that's, arguably approaching the gifted range, whose reading skills are at the 25th percentile, which is average and in the normal range there. But how many percentile points are between the 75th and 25th? What's 75 minus 25?
50, like a whole other person, like the
Yes.
average person.
That's a huge difference, right? And so what we can do, and this is what we're not going to get into tonight, but what I can do, and if you give tests like these, you can do, there are different formulas that you can look into and the scoring systems that will tell you what are the chances, like what's the probability of somebody with a 75th percentile IQ scoring at the 25th percentile on reading. How often does that just normally happen in the normal population? And that, I can tell you, it's extremely rare for that to happen just by chance alone. In other words, what we're looking at is something that's clinically significant, even though their reading skills are in the average range. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank y'all for saying yes, because I can't see everybody's faces whenever I share the screen, because I've got your videos on something else and I don't have enough space for everything. But anyway, all right. So here's the thing. If we were going to diagnose a learning disability, technically, well, I'll say this. There's a lot of different, there's no like real concrete way of diagnosing a learning disability. Now, there are ways that the schools will identify learning disorder based on their testing. And then there is the way that I was taught as a neuropsychologist, which is different than other schools of clinical psychology and then other schools of diagnosticians and things like that. In general, though, it's always, is there a significant or clinically significant discrepancy between where someone's IQ is as compared to where they're functioning academically compared to their peers? So in this case, we've got a pretty big significant difference between their IQ and their reading, their spelling, and their math. And even though we're in the average range for reading, compared to what they should be, and they're in the 12th grade, by the way, so they've got a 8.8 grade equivalent. That's pretty significant. We've got evidence here for dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. So I'll say it again. So dyslexia, which is in the DSM-5 TR, is called specific learning disorder with impairment in reading. Spelling impairment is going to be specific learning disorder with impairment in written expression. And then we've got specific learning disorder with impairment in mathematics. So dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. By itself right here, this would be technically enough to make a diagnosis of learning disability from a formal, like clinical standpoint. Now that might ring some bells, or not ring some bells, but it might set some alarms off in your head and saying, well, yeah, but just because they scored low on these tests, does that mean that they've got a learning disability? What other things could explain those low scores, if not a learning disability?
Like something wrong with the test. Like they didn't take the test correctly or didn't understand instructions is where I would go to.
Sure. So like maybe Maybe this person was an ESL, like English second language person, right? And here we are given a test that was normed on people with English as their primary language. Well, it would make sense. That wouldn't necessarily be a learning disability. It just means that they're going to score obviously lower on a test that's really testing their English proficiency much more so than it is their actual academic skills, right? That's a great point. You want to know what the number one question you should always ask yourself when it comes to interpreting these kinds of scores is this. What was that person's effort level? How was their motivation during testing? Right? So I'm here to tell you that most people, when they come test, when they get to the academic part, their brain's like, ugh. Right? And especially if they're a teen, because usually you got them out of school to test, as it were. And here they are being forced to do school on the day off at the doctor's office. Right? So it's always possible. And that's actually the number one most important thing to consider is what was this person's effort level like? Maybe they were just like, I'm just not going to try hard on this part. In fact, 60% of the scores that you see in front of you are explained by effort. Isn't that pretty wild? So if you didn't know that, you just look here and be like, oh, we got a learning disability. Well, it might not be an actual learning disability. It might be that if we had a $100 bill in front of this person and said, hey, if you score, almost perfectly on this reading, spelling, and math test, you get this $100. I guarantee you your scores would have been higher. And if that's the case, then we have to consider to what extent did their effort and motivation influence their scores. Yes, Karen. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can, yep.
Okay, I taught when I was younger, and I had a student that tested as qualifying for special ed, but he was absent. It was a second grader, absent every Friday. And so I felt like it wasn't, it didn't seem valid because, yeah, he scored lower, but that's because, he could borrow, but he couldn't subtract.
Sure.
He just had gaps in his learning. So would something like that skew the score?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, quality and quantity of education matters greatly because when we're looking at the scores there, these are compared to students and seniors in this case that didn't, miss school regularly, didn't have, like truancy and was the average healthy, passing all their classes kind of students here. Yep.
Thank you.
And if our person that we're testing does not match that group, and as in your example, that's a factor that you have to consider. And it might, but it's also possible that you could have both, right? You can have a student that misses a lot, but then also genuinely has a learning disability. So here's what I tell parents about, and parents and just adults and patients I work with. A learning disorder, when you hear the word dyslexia or dyscalculia or dysgraphia, those aren't necessarily lifelong conditions. Sometimes they are, but in the vast majority of cases, it's a combination of several factors that if we improved either just exposure to quality education or the right type of instruction, or in some cases, if we treat ADHD or depression or anxiety or even test anxiety, things like that, that if we retested that person, they would score higher and they wouldn't officially qualify for a learning disorder. Okay. In my opinion, not just mine, but just neuropsychology in general, you can have what's called a pure like learning disability, which you're going to be born with, and you're going to have evidence of that. In most cases, with like a brain MRI showing like differences in the development of the brain and those parts of the brain, and or the presence of some sort of language disorder, because language is fundamental to brain development, but reading is not. But I'm here to tell you, if you have a language disorder, it's going to carry over into your reading ability. The other types that I see are like brain injuries at birth, or like prenatal exposure to like medications, things like that, or even like, complex trauma or neglect throughout childhood and adolescence to the extent that it has prevented the normal development of academic skills, and not because of like direct interference of actually attending school or quality education. It's literally a neurological thing. But the vast majority of learning disability can be explained by things like ADHD. Just so you know. I know that sounds pretty wild. There's a lot of people out there diagnosed with dyslexia and dyslexia only. But I'm here to tell you that it is quite rare for me to come across somebody who has a pure learning disability and it not be explained by either something else from a medical, like neurological standpoint, and or the presence of what is a diagnosable ADHD. Okay. Now, the way learning disability, though, is diagnosed, it doesn't really take into account what causes it. Although the DSM-5 does say you can't diagnose a learning disability if their scores are low simply because of like quality of education or, you're not supposed to be able to do that, but they don't tell you how you're supposed to evaluate quality of education. So again, psychiatry sometimes just shoots from the hip, but it bothers me to no end whenever people get diagnosed with learning disability without having had somebody tell them what it means, because it doesn't always mean lifelong anything. All right. So the RAT5, does anybody know what the RAT stands for? Not like the mouse, but the test, RAT, W-R-A-T.
I can't remember. I read it, but I don't remember.
Sure. It'll be a good idea, especially for licensure, because they're going to throw these acronyms at you sometimes, and it's going to be the main ones. So like the RAT, the WAIS, the WISC, you probably won't even see the WASI on there or anything like that, but they'll say, what's the average, or what are the 3 main subtests of the RAT, or the 4 main subtests of the RAT? And you'll be like, well, I think that stands for Walrus. No, it's probably not that. No, it's Wide Range Achievement Test. And it goes all the way down to H5, I believe, if I remember right. So anyway, then I also gave the Wyatt, which is the Wechsler Individual Achievement Test. And this is the new one. I like the new one because it gives me a dyslexia index. Although no one really knows what that exactly means. All we know is that if you don't score in the normal range, if you score below the normal range on the dyslexia index, then I'm sorry, below the average range on the dyslexia index, the lower the score goes from there, below the 25th percentile, the more likely you have dyslexia.
So it's backwards.
Right. So the higher the score, the better, meaning that it's less probable that you have dyslexia. The lower the score on the dyslexia index, the more likely you have it. I know it's kind of confusing. So anyway, oh, here's a good example. So here are two different tests. We gave the RAT5 subtest, word reading, where you literally just are shown a word and you have to just pronounce it correctly out loud. Even if you don't know what it means, we're just looking at how well can you read that word phonetically. Then on the Wyatt, which is a different test, we also gave the same subtest, except their version of it. And this shows you how good actually my postdoc is. We've got a pretty close score, right? So we've got word reading at the 25th percentile on the RAT, and then the 23rd percentile on the Wyatt. In other words, we can be pretty certain that that's a pretty fair estimate of their actual word reading ability. Does that make sense? Yeah. But you can see the slight difference though, right? So over here, we're at the 25th percentile. It's the 8.8th grade. Here it's the 23rd percentile, which is lower, but it's at the 9.1 grade. That's why if I can give you any advice, if you remember nothing else about tonight, hopefully you remember more, but when it comes to grade equivalents, don't put too much stock in what those say. Because your patients will come back to you and be like, gosh, it says here that I read at the 5th grade reading level or whatever. That may or may not be true, because functional reading and even comprehension is a different thing within each context as compared to how do you perform on a standardized word reading subtest or even a reading comprehension subtest from one of these things. Plus, the standard error measurement for grade equivalent is pretty substantial. Sometimes it's like plus or minus 4 grades. So if it says 8th grade, another thing it could be saying is basically between the 4th and 12th grade is that person's reading level. That didn't tell you much. Basically, it just tells you they can read. Okay. Everybody's like, this isn't as exciting as I thought it would be. That's okay. It's all right. It's Monday. I've got a Red Bull if anybody needs one. Okay. Everybody gets real mad about Red Bulls. Or is like, oh, that's unhealthy, drinking Red Bulls. Okay. The sugar-free ones actually have some decent vitamins in them, just so you know. The caffeine is actually less than most cups of coffee, especially what grad students drink. Y'all drink like the solid version of coffee where you have to like cut it with a knife. But I don't know how I got off on that topic. My point there is don't knock Red Bulls. If you need one, I'll always have a spare one. All right. If we ever teach in person. All right. Hang on one second. Hi, babe. What you need? You need some water? Grab some. My daughter just stepped in. She got her ears pierced this weekend. Did it hurt? Yeah. You're brave though. I'm getting my tongue pierced next weekend. I'm just kidding. I'm not really doing that. She said I was so weird. She's 9, so she's starting to think I'm not cool anymore. That's cool. I feel confident enough in my coolness. I don't need the affirmation. I'm just kidding. Actually, it makes me real sad. All right, getting back to the test scores. Look at this stuff. So this is the attention testing that we did. even if you don't know what you're looking at, in general, red isn't great. Everybody agree? There's a reason why bulls charge at that color. Red means stop and or usually like if your engine is, check engine lights are red. So in other words, you don't have to know exactly what this test is measuring to know, well, here's the attention and information processing section. And what do y'all think? What do you see there?
I think it's ADHD. I don't know.
You're actually right. Though I'll show you where we have more evidence to support that, because I would never want to use just my attention testing to make a diagnosis of that. But yeah, that's going to be one of the first things that we think through is like, good grief. Here's a person with a high average IQ, right? 75th percentile. And if we're assuming that they gave good effort, then here are some really low scores on attention. So the IVA 2 is 20 minutes of the world's most boring voice saying 1 and 2. Probably told you about this test several times, but it's a measure of sustained attention on tasks that are not immediately rewarding. And this person runs out of gas pretty quickly. Everybody agree?
Could there show a difference between ADD and ADHD?
That's a great question. So ADD is no longer an official diagnostic label as of 2013. Now we have ADHD, and there are 3 subtypes. There is the ADHD predominantly inattentive subtype, which used to be called ADD. Then there's the predominantly hyperactive and impulsive subtype. And then there's the combined presentation, the you got it all subtype. So in the past, before we knew what we know now about the brain with ADHD, they made the distinction between ADD and ADHD, but the reality is, and even the 3 subtypes have very little data to support that those are actually legit. If you have ADHD, you've got it all. It just depends on the context and how old you are. Yeah. But this test, I love it because it's been normed on 50,000 people age 6 to 96. And so when we're looking at the scores here, by the way, this is compared to other 17-year-olds without ADHD, without any history of anything, and believe it or not, who have average IQs. So here's a person with a high average IQ that should be scoring substantially higher than their peers with an average IQ. Everybody agree with that? But instead, they're scoring way lower than even their peers with average IQs. So that shows you the significant difference there. So what could explain this? Well, number one, I want you to always think through, I wonder how hard they tried, right? That's the first step. The second step, especially when we're talking about attention and like time tests, how did they sleep the night before? I don't know about y'all, but I remember as a kid, I would sometimes have a hard time sleeping the night before I would go take a bunch of tests for like the standardized tests. I'd be so nervous about it. And if you don't sleep, the first thing to go is your attention span and your processing speed. Okay. What's another thing that can slow your brain down?
hunger.
Yes. Absolutely. And if you're looking at a kid's testing, you always want to ask, well, when did they give this attention test? Was it right before lunch? Or was it first thing at 8 a.m. in the morning when we know that doesn't matter what kind of coffee you've got going on, your brain's not going to be awake yet? Or was it at the very end of the day, right? Why wouldn't we want to give this test, this attention test at, let's say, 8 p.m.?
Not awake fully yet.
Right. So what time should we cut it off then? It's kind of a trick question.
I'd say in between breakfast and lunch, or after lunch, before the end of the day, something like that, perhaps.
Sure. And it really, so like, in other words, the time of day does matter. So like, if reason why, like, as for psychologists, you won't see psychologists giving these kinds of tests in the evening is because the brain isn't fully functional, right? We know that scientifically. So the brain's getting ready to go to sleep after about 6-7 p.m. Now, with that said, wouldn't that kind of prove a point that homework is kind of a silly idea?
Homework is a silly idea.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And tests and quizzes too.
Right. And grades. We'll just have a big rebellion. I'll join y'all. I still will give you guys a grade. You can just not pay attention to it. It's up to you. I'm just kidding. With our testing, what we're looking at here is pretty significant attention problems, and I'm going to jump ahead a bit just to show you where I go next, because we're looking at frontal lobe functioning, really. Like, this is the alertness level of this person. And if they scored this low, right? So imagine that this is where they score most days. Like, this is a good estimate of where they're at most days. They're getting good sleep. There's nothing else causing it. This is just where they function. Now look back at their academics. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? In other words, can you learn how to read if you can't pay attention? Everybody's like, what'd you say?
Can you learn how to read?
Right.
No.
No, because if you're asleep, which is 0% attention span, I don't care who you are, you're not gonna be able to learn how to read. I cannot teach somebody how to read if they're asleep. This person, if 100% is like fully alert, 0% is asleep, this test would suggest that they're about 30% awake. Right? And if this is where they've been for most of their life, gosh, I'm actually surprised they score as high as they did academically. In fact, the only way we would explain that is the fact that they're so intelligent. They've used their intelligence to compensate for their attention problems. And even despite that, they're still not doing great, but they're scraping the bottom of normal. So the opposite would also be true, right? If we could treat this, if we could make their attention better, what would we expect about their academic skills?
Increase.
So imagine if, and I've done this before, if you treat the attention problems, if we retested their academic skills in about a year, all this would be either average or high average, closer to where their IQ is. Now, it doesn't just, you can't just treat that and just send them on vacation. They would actually have to be like learning the skills. but then they would actually be able to learn those skills with some remedial coursework, and they would jump up closer. So in other words, they would no longer have these learning disabilities if we treated this. A lot of times when I see a pure dyslexia, all this will be pretty normal. And then we'll still have the reading problems. And then you'll see here when we test the language, they'll have impaired language functions. That's what pure dyslexia looks like, just so you know. This person, their verbal fluency is off the charts. Their word finding skills at the very tip top. But the sentence repetition test, just so you know, is a test where they have to repeat a sentence. Like the examiner says, like, take this home. They would have to repeat that exactly straight back to them. And then they would say, where is the child? Where is the child? The car will not run. The car will not run. Why are they not living here? Why are they not living here? And it gets progressively longer. And so a lot of times people with attention problems, as you can imagine, have a hard time with working memory, auditory working memory, or auditory processing. It's another way of saying it. And just for the record, I don't know, we're going to have to wrap up here in a minute, but just for the record, auditory processing disorder is not in the DSM-5 TR, never has been, and in my opinion is not a real diagnosis. Although you'll hear people talk about it, even see it in reports, things like that. But in my opinion, it is not a real diagnosis. And usually it's only speech language pathologists that will diagnose that.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Then why did they give that? I was diagnosed as a child with the severe speech impediment, though, too. My daughter, too, we were diagnosed with language disorders of written and receptive expressive disorders. So I guess you could say we were lifers. As you said before, true, you know.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
we just don't have dyslexia. We don't have, I mean, we have a range. But why do they even say that, you know, because I have noticed the differences over the years of, you know, when my daughter, you know, when I was younger, they said that. And then my daughter, when she was younger, and then they'd go, you know, I guess, I mean, now that we're in the assessment classes, that it's just in the language disorder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you think about, so I just want to make sure I heard your question correctly. So you're asking why has there been differences over time and how they define it? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, and that's the problem, is that if you ask 10 different specialists, including myself, like to define dyslexia, you're going to get 10 different answers, because there's like a legal definition and there's like the IDEA definition, and you know, like Scottish Rite has their own like specialty clinic over there. They kind of have their own unique theory on it. But if you ask behavioral neurology or even cognitive neuroscientists about those things, or neuropsychologists, I'll tell you is that, so the English language itself is a terrible language to try to read. As far as language goes, we are all built in with a language acquisition device. That's what like Chomsky, determined, is that even if you aren't taught how to speak, your brain will develop its own language.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that part of the brain, which is the left temporal lobe, left temporal parietal, occipital junction right there, actually not occipital, left just temporal parietal area, that part of the brain can have what's called microgyri, which is like little tiny ridges and bumps that they've identified that some people just randomly have, that can interfere with auditory comprehension efficiency, and or the transcortical like dysphagia, where you're going from hearing something, thinking your thoughts, and then translating it into speech and words and putting it in the right syntax, things like that. There's literally, it's called your arcuate fasciculi. There's like the wire between your Wernicke's area and your Broca's area is a wire, your axons. That area can have like connections that are formed incorrectly, making that processing harder, or you can even have a speech, a motor programming difficulty like I did, where it goes hand in hand, no pun intended, with dysgraphia, which is poor handwriting, and speech difficulties, because that part of the brain, the motor programming for speech is right next to your fine motor control for your hand. I'll show you an example of that real quick, and I know we're gonna have to run here in a second. And if you got to hop off, don't worry. I mean, I'm never gonna judge anybody. Just, but I want to show you this real quick. It's called the homunculus. And you see this? So this is the motor cortex of the brain, the outside of the brain. And different parts of the brain control different parts of the body. So like your fingers and hand, fine motor control is controlled by this part right here, whereas your lips, face, and tongue and all that stuff is right here. So geographically very close together, which is why you always will see dysgraphia and speech impediment go like together or hand in hand. Let's try not to say that again. But I guess my point there is that language disorders are the higher order cortical processing. So it's like, if you hear somebody speaking, how well can you process and accurately put it all together and keep it all together in the same order so that you understand what is being said? You can have a stroke in your Wernicke's area, and it will completely severely interfere with your ability to process things. You can still hear and understand that words are coming in, but your brain won't put them all back together correctly to keep it in working memory. And so going back to the auditory processing disorder and why that's not a real thing is because auditory processing disorder assumes discreteness in that function in other words, like the ability to process auditory information go in your ear, be transduced, sensory neural into like actual like perception. They're saying that there's a disorder there that is primary to the ability to hold words in mind, which is a working memory function. But there's been no science to suggest that unless you've got a hearing problem, which would be a true auditory processing disorder, you can't separate language from that disorder without including working memory, which in fact ends up being ADHD in most cases, in my opinion.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess they just kind of somehow mix those together.
Yeah. So
many years. Even I was a special ed teacher too, and they, I worked with autism, and they would even say, the child had auditory processing too.
Yep. It's
diagnosis with it too. So
it's more of a speech language pathology term that they've never been able to provide enough science so that it would be added to diagnostic anything.
Okay.
But it helps them because they can work. They don't realize it, I guess, but they're actually, when a child has speech therapy or speech language therapy, I should say, due to auditory processing disorder, they're conceptualizing it in the same way that anybody with ADHD would. It's a working memory problem. So they're working on that in the speech therapy. They just don't have the capacity to diagnose ADHD or even know what they don't know on that front. And so they just kind of see only the auditory processing piece.
Okay.
Yep. So
Well, that actually makes sense then more, even because that was the first thing I got diagnosed because I had such a severe speech impediment that I guess that's just what stuck with me first.
sure. Well, and like I said, I was diagnosed with dysgraphia and also had speech difficulties, but they never diagnosed the speech difficulty, although I did participate in speech therapy as a kid. And but with all that said, I mean, it's what I would describe it anecdotally to me is it's like disappearing ink in my mind. So when people are talking, I've got a short amount of time that I can keep their information in mind before it starts disappearing on me. And it usually comes across in like multi-step verbal instructions. Or if my wife asked me to pick up stuff from the grocery store. Because did y'all know there's like 11 different sizes of mayonnaise jars, by the way? There are. I mean, like, who's out there like, well, that's too big. That's too small. Like, I need just like, there's 11 different sizes. Anyway, so you can't just say, hey, can you pick up some mayonnaise? I'm going to get the biggest jar every time, folks, because can't go wrong with that. All right. Well, let's pause it there tonight. I know we didn't talk about private practice. We will do it next time. I promise. We got plenty of time. We're meeting every week. Was this helpful tonight a little bit?
Yeah. I have a question, Dr. Armstrong, just
Absolutely.
about as far as I don't know, I've been doing the reading and the quizzes. I have not started on the assignment. Just kind of starting to feel a little bit behind, and just wanting to know what your recommendation is as far as like staying on top of things. I think I need to do my Enneagram. I haven't done that yet. I think it's probably part of why I'm feeling behind. But
Sure.
yeah, just where would you say what should we focus on, or to be on point?
Well, I would say the quizzes are probably going to be the easiest just to get knocked out because they're pretty quick. I mean, honestly, the exams are pretty easy too, to be honest with you. If you're gonna prioritize, gosh, I hate to say this, but don't procrastinate. That's always my like number one, recommendation, although I am the world's worst. With that said, if you're going to prioritize, try to get caught up, I would rather you spend your time with the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs and working through that assignment, because you can go back pretty quickly. I don't want to, don't tell anybody I said it, even though this is recorded. You can go back pretty quickly and knock out the quizzes and the exams. That piece is the piece that if you do it, just if you wait till the last minute and just get it done, you won't benefit from it in the way that I think you could, which would be most important to understanding personality types and yourself included as a therapist as it relates to becoming a counselor. Yeah. So I hope that helps, but really and truly, I mean, those quizzes can be knocked out real quick. So I would, if you're going to put anything off until the end, I would probably do that. Because of the grade, I would make sure I would get, your exams completed, but the real most benefit as far as self-reflection time goes, and which you're not going to have a whole lot of time once you get out of grad school, you're kind of being forced to do, would be the Enneagram stuff. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
I've seen the first couple of videos, but have we been posting up the videos every week? Because I guess I'm looking in the wrong place or something. I don't know.
I just today uploaded 9:25 and 10:02.
Okay,
Yeah, and
so they're just in the same, they would be where the week is.
so week
with
3
that
and
week.
week 4. Yep.
Okay, good deal. Thank you.
I'm sorry for taking so long to get that done.
It's okay. I just work until 5:30, and so it's hard for
Sure.
me to get home by 6. So I'm going to see them, but I just thought, well, maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. But that's great.
Absolutely, completely
you.
understand. I promise to be better moving forward, though, for sure.
It's okay.
Thanks for asking. All right. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, we will continue the same case next time because just to give you a little preview, get you real excited. Whatever. I know you guys don't get excited as I do about this stuff, but you'll see we're going to go over the MMPI, which is personality testing. We're going to understand what all this stuff is. We'll talk about the brief 2, which is a behavior rating inventory of executive functioning, how it can be used to like screen for ADHD and autism, things like that. Okay. And so, yeah, we'll do all that next time. Sound good?
Yes, thank you.
For sure. We all have a wonderful rest of your week, and hang in there, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you.